And yes, there is a cat cleaning herself behind me. There's also another little one right over there. You can. The skirt that I'm going to show you today is inspired from a dress that I have admired for a long time on the Lulu's website. I will throw it up here in just a second. It was originally going to be a duplicate attempt off of this dress, and then as I was working through it, I decided that I wanted to make it a two-piece outfit and get a little more usability and wearability out of it. So today is just going to be the skirt. I will have a second video in which I show the shirt, which actually became a bodysuit, which will be a part 2 video that if I ever learn how to link to a previous YouTube video, I will do so. I did end up adding one extra piece to the skirt kind of at the end of the process. It sort of just came to me, so it does differentiate itself a little bit more from the Lulu's dress in that way. This skirt is also super fall themed, super fall inspired. I love the fabric that I found for it. I ended up using crepe fabric, which it's a little bit trickier, a little bit slipperier, a little bit slippery, but I learned a lot while working with it, and I absolutely love how it came out. So if you like the skirt, stick around and I'll walk you through how I did it. All right, so first things first, here is the dress from Lulu's. It is $79, and at the time, only an XL version was available. I probably could have bought the XL and then taken it in, but I was really interested in making it into two pieces, and I wanted to practice my gathering. And these are the two fabrics that I chose from Joann's. I will link them below. They were $9.59 a yard. I did buy 2 yards of each piece because I didn't really know what I was doing yet, and I wound up with quite a bit of extra. So you probably don't need 2 full yards of each fabric. I bet 1 full yard would do, but that's the fabrics. So I want to cover a little bit of the background and pattern research to how I developed the design for this skirt. If you don't care about this, please skip ahead. If you do, I'll walk you through a little bit about what I did. And I know that the title of this video says that it's not a circle skirt, and it's not. But in order to figure out the design, I did end up doing a little bit of circle skirt math to figure out the different circumferences that I would need at each tier of the skirt. So for the overall look of the skirt, I knew that I wanted a quarter circle skirt type shape or an A-line. I knew I wanted it to be a midi skirt, and I knew I wanted it to have a couple of different tiers and alternating colors between light and dark. So I kind of did reverse circle skirt math, and I'm sure you've seen those calculators that are out there. So I knew that my circumference was going to be 30 because that's my waist. And I knew that I wanted the length of each tier to be about 9 or 10 inches. And I went with 10 inches to give myself some seam allowance room. So that makes a 30-inch length skirt and a 30-inch waist or belt area. And that gave me R. And R is my radius. So because I knew I wanted each tier to be 10 inches, I just added on 10 inches to get each new R. So I went from a radius of 18.5 to then 28.5, 38.5, and 48.5. And I will note I'm rounding a little bit. Sometimes when you do the circle skirt math, you get numbers like 60.13. I don't know how to cut 60.13. So I pretty much just choose the closest quarter inch to each measurement and make it work. So I used my radiuses and worked backwards to get what the circumference of an A-line skirt or a quarter circle skirt would be. And I was using 30 as my waist circumference. And then on each tier down, I ended up getting 46 inches, 61.75 inches, and at the very bottom, 77.5 inches. So to transpose the C measurements that we just got onto a visual of the skirt, this is what it would look like. On the left-hand side, you'll see the finished measurements, and on the right are the cut measurements. For the belt, again, waist or C is 30, and I ended up cutting out a rectangle of 5 inches by 32 inches. I gave myself extra both in height and width on this just to be safe. For the circumferences, these green lines show the gather. So you're going to be attaching a straight edge to a gathered edge each time and trying to achieve that length of 30 inches, 46 inches, 61.75 inches, and the bottom, which is 77.5 inches, or just about. So for the actual cut pieces for each tier, for tier 1, it was 60 inches by 10. For tier 2, it was 92 inches by 10. And for tier 3, it was 123.5 inches by 10. And if you'll notice, each tier is double the circumference. When I was learning a little bit about gathering, I read somewhere that for a good gather, you want no less than 2 to 2.5 times the amount of fabric. Even better was 3. But I knew that I didn't want a a huge gather. So I went with just double, and I do like how that ended up. So I would recommend doing double the fabric and then gathering it down to the circumference that you're going for. So for a visual of the cut fabrics and their dimensions, here you go. There's the belt and the waist, tiers 1, 2, and 3, and the blue lines represent the gathers. Again, you're gathering the top part of each piece down to the circumference of the tier above it, if that makes any sense. I took some muslin fabric to practice my gathering a little bit. I did 2 base stitch lines all the way through every single tier that I was working on, and then sort of manipulated the fabric to gather it down. So on the long edge of each rectangle, or on the blue squiggly side of each rectangle, I picked the longest stitch length that I had, and I did 2 rows of base stitching all the way down. They were probably anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch apart. I'm pretty bad at using measurements on my machine. I usually just use whatever the presser foot width is, but I think it came out to somewhere between a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. Also, probably a good time to note, for crepe fabric or thinner fabrics in general, you should be using a 60 or a 65 needle, and the sharper, the better. Everyone say hi, Wiggles! Would not be a sewing project for me if I didn't have a cat photobombing my progress. So at this point, I've done a base stitch or 2 rows of base stitching all the way down one of the long ends of each rectangle. You want to manipulate your gathers all the way down, get them kind of evenly spaced apart, because the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to sew down in the middle of the 2 rows of base stitching to secure all your gathers in place. For this, you can do anywhere from 2 to 2.5 for your stitch length, but you want to keep those gathers together. I will say for one of these tiers, I did try to pin all the gathers in place to kind of keep them together, and that didn't really seem to make a difference, so you can pin it if you want to. I ended up not. So I am just sewing right in the middle of those 2 rows of base stitching. And at this point, I was actually having a little bit of trouble with the crepe fabric because it's kind of slippery. I was finding that my stitches weren't always holding, so I was skipping some stitches. And I looked it up and learned that you can use tissue paper. And I actually saw you can also just use paper, but I did have tissue paper handy. So I cut out some thin strips and put the tissue paper underneath the fabric, and that really helped the stitches hold. And then at the end, I was able to just pull it off. It worked great. Super recommended if you're having trouble with thinner, lightweight, slippery fabrics. Now that you're done securing all your gathers in place, it's time to pin each of your tiers together. Again, one of the edges is going to be straight, and one of them is going to have the gathers. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but my longest tier I had to cut in 2 pieces. It was something like, I think it was 123.5 inches in length, and my fabric just wasn't that long. So I knew I was going to have at least one extra seam all the way down, and then I was going to be putting a zipper into the skirt too, so I was just planning on having a seam on either side and doing a side zipper instead of a back zipper. That way I would be pretty even. So pinning it all the way down, and then I'm going to sew along that edge, really just trying to match up with the row of stitching that I just did, the one that was between the 2 layers of base stitching. And again, here we have an instance of helpful kitties helping me sew. This time it's Cuddles. Thank you, Cuddles, for your contributions to my sewing projects. So here I'm just securing it all together, the straight edge to all the gathers, even with Cuddles' help. Thanks. And here it's time for a fit check. So I've attached tiers 1 and 2. I have not done the belt yet, wrapping it around, making sure that it fits. And you can see I've actually got a little bit of extra. So I probably could have either gathered a little bit more if I wanted to, but honestly, I'm happy for some extra width. It gives me a little bit more room. And at this point, I actually started to get pretty excited about how the skirt was coming out. Fast forward a little bit and you can see that I've added tier 3 in the same manner. I'm also double checking that my belt fits, which I probably should have done a while back, but it's time to attach the belt. So I am folding it in half to figure out where the mid part is, and I mentioned a little bit ago that I was going to have a side seam on either side of the skirt. So I'm finding the midpoint of the belt and I'm going to attach it first to the side seam that I have, and then I will pin it out in either direction. So I'm attaching the belt here. Again, my stitch length is probably 2 to 2.5. I probably could have folded the belt in half and sewed both edges down at the same time, but I'm only smart in hindsight, so that's just my advice now. And at this point, I'm working with enough layers of fabric that I really didn't need the tissue paper anymore. That was more so when it was just one layer doing the base stitching and the gathering. So here's my beautiful belt halfway done. And if my comment earlier wasn't clear, I could have just folded it in half like this from the beginning and then pinned it down and sewed it once, but I didn't, so I am doing a little bit of extra work here, but that's okay. Pin it on one side, pinning it on the other side just to make sure that it's even all the way through, and then I'll pin in the middle and throughout. So I sewed down that edge, and now it's time for another fit check. I've got the belt on, the third tier on, here's my side seam, and then on this side, really thankful that I added those 2 extra inches in on the belt. I'm gonna pin it, sew all the way down, and then start working on the zipper. So off camera, I pinned it and sewed all the way down, and now I'm just going to trim the excess off before I serge it and start adding the zipper. I will say, and do just want to point out that just the way that these layers are done, the edges were pretty uneven when I matched them up, but as long as the lighter sections match lighter sections at the seams, no one's ever going to notice, and you're going to trim off that excess anyways. So it's actually a pretty uneven edge here, but again, I'm just trimming it off and it's going to look great. Now it's really time to attach the zipper. So something that I wanted to comment on, if you wanted to modify this project, you could probably make your belt rectangle the same length or width as your top tier, and then just add elastic in and you'd get a really similar effect. I've been working with zippers lately and just enjoy the practice, so I had wanted to put a zipper in. And the best way that I learned how to do zippers is to sew down that side seam first. You then attach the zipper from the back, making sure that the teeth match up as perfectly as you can with that side seam, and then you sew down all the way around, kind of like a very long U. I'll do a close-up in a moment. So you sew all the way down, and once the zipper is securely in, then you just seam rip out that section of the zipper, and then you have an almost perfect invisible zipper. So I finished pinning my zipper in place, and now it's time to sew it down. One thing that makes this a little more complicated than your average zipper is that you've got 2 different colors here from the belt to tier 1. So I sewed down the zipper on the belt first using black thread. Once I had that secured in place, then I switched threads and sewed the zipper where it is in tier 1 of the skirt. When you're doing an invisible zipper where you've already sewed down the side seam first, you do have to do a little bit of manipulation with that part of the zipper, the pull tab thingy, there you go, the pull tab on the zipper, because it's a little bit bulky and you can't actually get your presser foot around it easily. So after I did the first chunk of the zipper and got that part done, I moved the pull tab up and out of the way so that I could easily sew the white section. So even if you're doing this with, not alternating fabric and whatnot, you're still going to have to manipulate that pull tab a little bit. But I really prefer this as my method to putting in zippers. It just makes for such a clean look on the outside. To give you a close-up on that step, here I've sewed the black part of the belt down, and now I'm just going to kind of insert my finger between where the pins are and take that pull tab and just kind of move it on up so that it's now in the section that I've sewed and out of the way, so I can sew the white section of tier 1 down more easily. So it had started to get pretty dark, and the camera angle that I was using, my big fat fingers were in the way, so I don't actually have any footage of me finishing the zipper. But I sewed down the rest of tier 1 using the white thread and then seam ripped open the zipper. If anyone is interested in a zipper tutorial, perhaps one with a white zipper and colored thread or something like that where it's a little bit easier to see, let me know. I'd be happy to throw that together. So then, to finish off the rest of the skirt, I just have to hem the end. I'm including a little bit of serger work here, but I do want to comment, you don't need a serger. I honestly happened upon one a couple of months ago, so most of my sewing experience and sewing life has been serger-less, but now that I have one, I'm using it pretty much every chance that I get because they're beautiful and fun, but they are expensive and not necessary, so you definitely don't need one to do a project like this, or honestly, many, many projects. But finished up the skirt by serging the edge and then hemming up the bottom of the skirt. I pinned up the hem about a ½ inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch or so, pinned it all the way around the border of the skirt, and then finished it off with a straight stitch, which is the only stitch that I've actually been using throughout this entire project. So I just finished sewing that hem all the way around, and then look at that. Here is my beautiful edge and hem of the end of my skirt. And here's my zipper. As you can see, I seam ripped it out. The only thing that I'm missing actually is a hook and eye. I couldn't find a black one on hand, so I had to add that after the end of the project. So at this point, you could totally stop. You have a great, cute fall gathered skirt, and you really don't have to do anything more to it. But as I was finishing up the project, I realized that I was probably going to wear this skirt with boots, and that I would really like it if somehow they, showed off my boots or pulled up a little bit above my knees. And so I ended up making 2 little tiny tubes that turned out just like this. I made them 2 inches wide and then folded it over and sewed down the entire long side and then the short side, and then actually kind of really struggled to turn them inside out because it wasn't a straight tube, it had a closed end, but I fussed with it enough and got them turned inside out. I then grabbed 2 buttons that were about the right size and created little buttonholes on the end of them. Same as with the serger, if anybody wants a buttonhole tutorial, especially if you don't have a buttonhole foot, or even buttonhole settings on your sewing machine, let me know. I can put something together. So I'm using tissue paper here again under the tube that I've made because it was a little bit slippery. I also measured out the length of my button, which was about a ½ inch, and drew in marker on my fabric exactly where my buttonhole was going to go. So then I made my buttonhole around that ½ inch mark, which I'm doing here. So I've done 1/2 of the buttonhole. I am flipping the tube around. I'm going to do the second half of the buttonhole, and then I will cut open the buttonhole so the button can go through. To adhere the straps that I made to the skirt, I measured in about 10 or 11 inches from each side seam and pinned the strap on the inside. Definitely be careful about which direction you pin the strap on. You want to make sure that the tissue paper doesn't end up facing out when you do button it down. And I also made these straps way too long. I only ended up needing maybe 2.5 inches or so for the actual strap. So I pinned it in place, sewed it down, and hand stitched the buttons in place. So here's the final result. I totally love how it came out. I like it both with and without the boot showing straps. I think it's really fun. I love how the gather came out, and I'm super excited to wear it this fall. So if you loved it too, leave me a comment, let me know, or feel free to ask a question. And of course, give my video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see future videos like this. Thanks so much for watching.